Hey there, hope you're doing well. In this video, let's talk about problem solving. Let's take an example. Let's say you're given an assignment, and I also talk about this in the context of interviews. A lot more and more of technical interviews these days have a coding assignment. Maybe it's live coding, maybe they give you a project and you build it and you come back and then you explain what you did to the group of interviewers. Regardless, or it could be a school project, whatever it is, right? How you're implementing a new feature at your workplace. You have a list of requirements, and I've seen people quite often, when they see this big list of requirements, bulleted items, they tend to get overwhelmed, right? And maybe as you get started and you're new to this business, you probably get a little bit more overwhelmed, and then maybe as you do it for a lengthier, longer period of time, you know how to go about doing it. But regardless, when you see this big list, it's natural to get a little bit anxious, right? You're like, oh, you know what? I have like 4 hours to do this, or maybe 90 minutes to solve these problems. How can I go about doing it? Because you start reading all of them. It's kind of like reading this essay when you take a GRE. When I did that a long while ago, right? You read it and then you look at the questions, and different people have different strategies. Maybe you want to look at the questions first, and then you look at the essay, or you want to look at some parts of the essay, skim through it, and then you look at the questions, right? Whatever strategy works for you. But I think it's important when you get these list of requirements, you have a time, say 90 minutes, right? A lot of these interviews and coding sessions are somewhere around there, and if they give you a take-home assignment, it probably is a half day's worth of work, and then you come back and present it to the team. In any case, you take the requirements, you look through all of them, you start reading one by one. Now you're thinking, okay, do I need to implement this in which language? What is the gem, or what is the node module that I might need to introduce? Maybe they give you a piece of code, a repo, or maybe it's empty, you have to start from scratch. And you're trying to imagine all of these things, the database, dependencies, how do I get all of these wired in? And I have like 90 minutes, and now thinking about all of this took 2 minutes already, right? Let's step back, just breathe normal, take it easy, and then say, okay, just spend here's my recommendation. If you have a 90 minutes, spend probably about 5 minutes or lesser just skimming through the whole project. Just try to get a sense for what it is, conceptualize it, and just digest that information, right? Just read it slowly, but it shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes, because usually it's like 8 to 10 bullets, maybe more, but you skim through it. Now after the 5 minutes, at the end of that, you have an idea, but you don't know all of the requirements. Now let's say there are 10 bulleted items. You don't want to go into the nth level of detail of the 6th bulleted item, because you haven't yet even hit the ground running. You have like 0 lines of code, no repo, nothing, right? So do this. Create an empty repository, go to GitHub, initialize your repo, or do a git init, whatever it is, right? There's a very basic steps. Get the repo in place, edit the readme, and just commit. You have a repo, right? So by the end of the 8th minute, you have a repo that's empty, but regardless, there's a repo. Now you create a branch, or just use your master branch. It doesn't matter if that's the default or main. And now you look at the first bulleted item. You're like, okay, what does it need done? Depending on the problem, whether you might be solving API, you might have been given an API project, or a UI only project, or maybe it's a full stack project, right? It doesn't matter. A lot of our strengths lie in one of these tiers. Even if we are full stack developers, it's like your mother tongue, right? Your native tongue. Even if you know 3 or 4 different languages, there is one language that your brain thinks in. And when it comes to programming, there might be a language such as that for you. For me, there is none. I don't know if I necessarily have a comfort zone with one of those languages. So, but the point I'm trying to make here is, you decide how you need to build this. Maybe they gave you the languages and the frameworks, maybe they did not. If they did not, then you want to initialize a repo. If it's Rails, you could just create a scaffold. If it's Node, you do it differently. Depending on that particular stack and language, you would approach the problem slightly differently. If someone gave you a Spring API, they asked you to build something in Java using Spring, you might start with the Spring Boot, and then you have a basic scaffold, and you have a place to get started with. So we were at the 8th minute when we created an empty repository. By the end of the 15th or 20th minute, we want to have few more files in place, right? Whether it's Ruby or JavaScript or Node or whatever it is that you're building in Java, make sure in the next 10 to 15 minutes you get the basic dependencies ironed out, because it's likely your project might most likely need a persistence layer. SQLite is very easy. You don't need to stand up your database separately on your machine. It's all embedded. So for a lot of these projects, I recommend you just go with something like that. Now you have that dependency, and maybe your project requires authentication, maybe it doesn't. If it does, then you're going to introduce those plugins, gems or modules or whatever those are. So the first 20 minutes or so, you're just trying to get set up with the environment. This is assuming they gave you 0 lines of code, right? They just gave you the requirements and you have nothing to start off with. So say in the first 20-25 minutes, you got 90 minutes, and let's say 25 minutes, you get a basic repo with dependencies in place, and you still haven't gotten started with implementing that very first requirement yet, right? But not to panic. So take 25 minutes out of the 90, so you got like 65 minutes of time left. Now you want to get started with solving your problems. And when you do that, don't get bogged down by the whole list of items that you want to be able to solve, because maybe you get to the end of that list, maybe you don't, right? And maybe they don't expect you to get to the end of the list. So again, you can skin this cat one of many ways. One option is to do as much of each of those items as possible, get to all of those items but maybe not complete them, or only take a few items from that list and complete them, and make them work, ensure that they work to the last detail. So even if they give you 10 things to do, you only did 4 things, but all of those 4 items work. Now how you want to approach that, it depends both on you and your client, and your read and your hunch on what your client's expectations might be, right? In some cases I would try doing a little bit of each of those items. In other cases I would just do more of some of those items, right? And there's no real there's no silver bullet or an easy answer there. That just varies. Now you get started with the first item. See if there is a database dependency. Again, there's no best way to do it. It's just what your comfort levels are and what your comfort zones are. So let's say I, for instance, would start off, in many cases, we're just getting the data model in place, because I have to have an idea as to what I want to build on top of. So let's say if it's tables or if it's collections, depending on which DB you end up going with, the terminologies change, but the underlying concept is not entirely different, right? So you basically get the data model. Maybe they're not going to give you more than 2 or 3 tables worth, right? There's going to be a few tables, few collections, and maybe there's some joint scenarios. Get the table and get the migration so your database is now populated. The next thing you want to do, if it's an API project, you want to get your APIs, whether it's REST or Graph APIs. Try to use your client to create those APIs. What I generally do is, you have a lot of, you just try to prepare for a number of different frameworks and technologies, have some of these scaffolds ready if possible, and it's you who's built all of them, right? You have access to your repos because it's your own IP. So you could use them as examples to build these layers. That way, for every interview, you're not building everything from scratch. You have a place to look at, and it's your code, and you're using your underlying dependencies or repositories to give you a footing to get started with building those requirements that your client or your account manager, recruiter, whoever the other parties, they want you to actually be solving. So you have the database dependencies. You create your migration, so your tables are in place at this point. Next thing I told you is go to the API layer. Try to create the basic routes, whatever, whether it's graph routes or RESTful routes. You create those dummy routes so you can actually hit your APIs. I'm at the 9th minute, but there's quite a bit more to talk here. Maybe I need to do a subsequent follow-up video, right? Let's call this video number 1. Let me pick up from where I left off in the next one. Thanks.